sermon by saying that I take seriously the privilege and the responsibility of preaching, and you know, I grew up with this mother. You don't know because you weren't there. So I did. I grew up with a mother who taught me, or who always said to me, I answer only to God and to my conscience. And I guess I just want to preface the sermon by saying that that's what I'm doing here, is I'm trying to answer to my understanding of God and my conscience. So I'm always aware that my words may land warmly, and they may land not so warmly, and I will hope that you offer me grace in knowing that this is what I felt called to say. Our gospel reading this morning actually comes from last week's lectionary portion, because admittedly this week's is just a little too thorny, and I didn't want to have to preach about where Jesus says, go and hate your mother and father. I'm like, no, I just don't want to do that. So I didn't. And I'm grateful to Beth and Amy and the good folks here who give me theological leg room to wander where I might. So, the reading this morning. The commentary that I read about it referred to that second scripture from Isiah as the likely point of reference regarding the repayment of the resurrection of the righteous. And I'm always interested in sort of going back to the source. So, the deliberate and viciously calculated starvation in Gaza has not abated, despite outcries from around the world, including Jewish Israeli citizens and politicians who realize, finally, that this human-designed famine has gone too far. A couple of weeks ago, I listened to or watched a Zoom interview with Dr. Ishmar Shorsh, who is the Chancellor Emeritus of the Jewish Theological Seminary and a distinguished professor of Jewish history, who escaped Nazi Germany as a small child in 1938. I watched and listened to him refer to what has been happening for the last 22 months in Gaza as, quote, a stain on Judaism itself. Many of us recognize the insidious ways this willful starvation will affect generations to come. I understand from the biblical commentary and the subtitles imposed on the gospel reading that the passage addresses, as Dave just said, humility and hospitality. Don't rush to seat yourself next to the host. Wait to be invited, to move up the status ladder. The humbled shall be exalted, the least and the last shall be first. I can't help but wonder if that's the case, why our Palestinian brothers and sisters and siblings are still waiting, mostly under rubble. In verses 12 through 14, Jesus instructs his followers to invite the marginalized, the sick and suffering, to a banquet. Notice it's a banquet. It's not a community supper or a simple meal. Jesus tells us to lavish the most luxurious, nutritious, sumptuous foods on those who have little to nothing. In 2025, I am curious how it lands in our bodies to hear this Jewish Palestinian rabbi preaching this message as his geographic descendants and relations are starving to death on sacred ground. Likely Jesus knew well the passage from Isaiah, the promise of a feast for all peoples. How might Brother Jesus respond today, situated in Gaza, recalling this prophecy? The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. Surely Jesus would drop to his haunches and weep. Perhaps he might run his hand across the death-soaked ground, and then I imagine he would rise and tell his followers to remove the blockades, to stop the snipers from firing at children and elders and parents, desperately trying to grab morsels of nourishment, anything they can reach. Bring in every truck he might instruct us that's been idling, stopped at borders, or checkpoints, unload those flotillas waiting in the waters, and feed every withering person who is still able to swallow. And then I imagine Brother Jesus might turn to all of us assembled, rag in hand, after patting his perspiring brow. He would hand us the cloth to wipe away the tears of those who suffer, which is all of us, because complicity carries its own suffering, its own terrible burden. And he might ask us how we can participate in removing the collective disgrace. A few weeks ago, I visited my precious cousins Gabe and Tendai and their two children, Isiah and Kunaya, ages 4 and 1.5. I had on a t-shirt that says, "Bombing kids is not self-defense." Shortly after I arrived, Isiah said to me, "Why does your shirt say kids? What else does it say?" And I hesitated before responding. I said, it says it's not good to bomb kids. To which he replied, "What's bomb?" And in that split second, I was relieved that my 4-year-old cousin had not yet learned about bombs. And I was acutely aware of all the Palestinian kids his age whose bodies are intimately acquainted with them. The shirt says it's not good to hurt kids, I tell him. And he seems satisfied and moves on to something else. I often think of Isiah and Kunaya, what I will tell them when they are old enough to ask about the tens of thousands of children who starved, lost limbs, lost relatives, lost hope, died wantonly in a country where our other first cousins live. And at the same time that Isiah and Kunaya are encountering a delightful world of hand-cut French fries and crispy tofu and popping locally picked berries and peaches into their mouths. How might any of us explain to this generation of children that as fervently as Brother Jesus directs us to ensure that the least well-positioned, those among us whose status is utterly disregarded, shall be the honored guests, why we have not done so? Not even here in this country, where the very folks who plant and harvest our food, who literally ensure that we eat well, are not seated at the feast themselves, and worse, are being rounded up and deported. It is indeed a mitzvah that congregations such as this offer community suppers and welcome whoever comes in. That act of fellowship matters, as do the individual and collective efforts of congregants offering support and shelter to migrant members of our community. Every sign held on 101, every letter to the editor, every circle, every conversation matters. Our voices, our breath that joins Ruach HaHalom, the breath of the universe, otherwise referred to as the Lord Almighty, who will prepare the feast for all peoples. I reckon the hungry among us wonder when that feast will come. And I know I don't need to wax on about statistics around hunger here or in any of the countries in the world where famine lurks. I know that everyone here cares deeply about hunger and hopefully joins Jesus in his desire to uplift and enfold folks in peril, those who are exiled to the edges or worse, utterly ignored or dehumanized. So the question I hear emerging from our scriptures is how to dwell in the both and. How to bear witness to the atrocities and raise our voices against them. How to unequivocally support the besieged, advocate for change, and not succumb to despair. How How do we, with our daily feasts and full bellies who enjoy myriad conveniences and relative safety, transform our gratitude and joy into courage and action on behalf of those whose invitations to the banquet have not yet arrived? I ask this to almost everyone I talk with these days because I hang out with similarly concerned and committed people. And we seem to land on some variation of taking in as much as we can of what's happening, staying informed but not inundated, so that we have the emotional, physical, and spiritual wherewithal to show up with our gifts, be they skills or our presence. We drink from well springs of sustenance so that we have the energy to show up, to offer warm accompaniment. We neither ignore nor dissolve into the heartbreak and devastation. We notice, we wonder, we acknowledge, and we appreciate the glimmers of grace, the apparently superhuman courage of journalists brave enough to keep covering atrocities, and doctors and nurses trying to save people as they themselves are targeted. We pause to savor the sweetness of late summer fruit and enjoy refreshing dips in the lake to balance the heat of the midday sun during the weekend vigils and the last-minute responses when any of our immigrant neighbors are being threatened. And beyond that, I am reminded of the wisdom of Gabor Mate, the oft-quoted physician and trauma specialist, that adults need a sense of belonging, meaning, and purpose. In the absence of those essential elements, any of us hollowed out by loss. In this country, we might think of communities devoid of industry where opioids have replaced jobs, and automation has eroded opportunity. How any of us hollowed out by loss might turn to extreme politics, expressed through a rhetoric of unbelonging for someone else. It could be immigrants or trans people or any other scapegoated group. In a world completely stratified and commodified, dependent on unrelenting extraction and capital, those who fall through the cracks of uber productivity and profits are rendered useless, expendable, or worse, dangerous enough to eradicate. While some of us have the good fortune to experience our inherent belonging and worth as co-constituent cells in the body of Earth, not everyone feels that. A lot of folks receive constant messaging to the contrary. And when the inherency of belonging is not assured, not felt, a human exists in a state of heightened alert that might be perceived as a constant threat. As Dr. Mate and other trauma specialists and our own experience teach us, we will do anything to alleviate that threat, even if it entails threatening someone else. My late loved dog, Zuki, feared other dogs despite her significant power and size. And as the high-priced dog trainer told me, her fear-driven aggression was the canine expression of the best defense is a fierce offense. And while I understood the anger and the upset of the humans who found their slipper-sized dog in my German Shepherd's mouth, I also understood that Zuki wasn't evil, she wasn't a monster dog, she was afraid, she felt threatened. So when I stand in front of the Dublin Church on 101, on Sundays between 1 and 2 for the weekly democracy vigil with my sign, and someone occasionally gives a thumbs down or hollers something unkind, I recognize a little bit of Zuki in them. Someone might drive a big truck or a loud motorcycle or a sleek coupe and still not feel full of meaning, purpose, and belonging. A person might be driving that vehicle as the only outward evidence of meaning and purpose, and a a tenuous belonging based on productivity and profit, not the inherent, irrevocable assurance of belonging I feel. And I don't feel it because I am better or different. I feel it because I am super lucky. For all my external advantages and privileges, my loving family of origin, I spent many years in counseling and 12-step programs and other forms of inner work, so that I could arrive at a place where I finally felt inherent worth, the embodied belief that I am enough and I don't have to earn the air I breathe. Every week when I sit in circle with folks at the jail whose incarceration literally removes them from the community, making assurance of belonging mighty hard to feel, I get angry at a criminal legal system designed to separate and punish. And I recall the indigenous adage that a person who causes harm acts as if they have no relations. Be it the person incarcerated for causing harm, or the people who profit from a carceral system that causes even more harm, be it genocide, be it intentional starvation, misguided legislation, or a blatant disregard of the law. We can all fall prey to acting as if we have no relations, forgetting that everyone, that every being is our relation. We are bound as earthlings in this togetherness, this inextricable belonging. As much as it would be convenient to believe in an omnipotent God who will swallow death forever and remove our disgrace, I imagine it is ours to imbue life with purpose by accepting the bounty of God's feast with a clear instruction from Brother Jesus that it is incumbent on us to share, to reciprocate, to co-create a world where all of us can host a banquet, not just be welcomed at the table, but design and build that table together and then feast with all our